Let me cut in before we get to the main part of the video. I am going to ask for a thumbs up, a subscribe, a like. Go ahead and ring the notification bell. Any kind of activity on the channel that helps me and lets me know that you are watching and enjoying the content. So with that being said, let's get right to the video. Welcome back to Saving Sally. I am Jason, and in this video we are going to talk about the camshaft that I chose for my build and why I chose it. This video is also a little bit of a confession that I discovered that I thought that I knew a lot about camshafts until I started doing research and trying to pick out a cam for myself. Certainly I knew how a cam worked. I understood that it has to open and close valves at just the right time and have both valves closed for the ignition and all of those things. There are a lot of things though that I didn't understand. I'm not going to get into what those were, but I am going to go down the list and talk about the cam that I've chosen. So I've gone with a Comp Cams. The name, these names are kind of funny. You know, you almost expect, Ultra Lifter Deluxe 2000 or something like that. But what we have is a Comp Cams 08-502-8. Not very exciting, but it is the cam. And the cam itself is probably not a very exciting cam. It's pretty mild. And the question that I almost immediately get asked is, well, why didn't you just put a bigger cam in there? If there's something that I've said on this channel 1,000 times, and I'll continue to say, it's that I wanted a car that drives very much like a stock vehicle, but has a lot of power when I put my foot down. I also wanted a car that had a stock sound. Although I like choppy, lopey idling, for my application in this vehicle, that's not what I was going for. So we didn't go with a cam that would bring that to the table. But here's what this cam does bring to the table. It builds fantastic low-end torque. I should have instant torque upon depressing the gas pedal. It brings fantastic mid-range torque, and this engine is only going to operate low-end to mid-range. We're just not going to see many times where my RPMs get above 5,500 RPMs, and so I would have been giving up too much power down low to pick it up in an area where my engine will never reach, so it would have just made for a poor build. So this cam offers the basic operating range, is exactly what I was looking for, 1,500 RPMs up to 5,500 RPMs, which is great. It is a hydraulic roller cam, which is great. The intake duration, I was looking at 218 at 50 thousandths. The exhaust duration is 224. I wasn't exactly looking for that. I wanted something that was more evenly matched, but I'll get into that in just a moment. Lobe separation angle, that was the last one. I was looking for something that was not quite factory, just a little bit hotter than a factory lobe separation angle. So 112 degrees of lobe separation angle fits that bill perfectly. There are a handful of reasons that I didn't go hotter, and I'm going to get into those now. Roller versus flat tappet is the very first decision that I had to make. The engine in my car came as a roller cam, but I was given an engine block that was not ready for roller cams. So certainly you can buy conversion kits to make put a roller cam in a engine block that was cast for a flat tappet. But the expense in doing that is almost not worth the cost when you consider how inexpensive small block Chevy engines really are. So I did decide to scrap that engine and go with a roller cam simply because of the durability of roller cams. You know, there was a time when an engine was considered worn out and time to scrap it if it hit 100,000 miles. And the advent of the roller cam over the flat tappet seemed to be what changed the game there. So after the roller cams came about, you began to see engines hitting 200, 250,000 miles before they ever actually gave up, and even further in some cases in more modern engines. And so just the durability alone, even if there was no other advantage, was enough for me to go ahead and say, no, I want a roller cam or nothing for my build. But there are some other advantages that come with the roller cam. If you take two cams that have identical numbers, one being roller and one being flat tappet, you're going to notice a tremendous difference in the profile of the lobes of that cam. The lobe profile on the roller cam allows us to much more dramatically open and close these valves. So instead of a gradual climb to peak and then a gradual descent back to closed like we see in a flat tappet, we see a near immediate open, and it stays near its peak opening point for almost the entire duration, and then you see an almost immediate close. So even though the numbers are the same, you get more performance out of a roller cam based off of the fact that the valve is open wider for longer, number for number. The second thing I was looking at was how much lift do I want to have out of this engine. Certainly high lift does bring more performance, but high lift also comes at the expense of additional wear on your valve train. So higher lift engines are generally something that you see that is an engine that doesn't see a lot of mileage. It's usually purpose built. Typically speaking, these are things that people run in drag strips or autocrosses, or maybe periodic touring, which honestly is probably what I'm going to do with the engine. But just in case I decided I wanted to go on some long haul trips in this car, I did want an engine that I didn't have to worry about breaking a spring or bending a push rod or something of that nature. So I did go with a more moderate lift. In a nutshell, the higher lifting cams are great, but you've sacrificed the durability of the engine to get that. So when you combine the fact that I've gone with a roller cam to get me a more dramatic open and close event, with the fact that I've purchased higher flow intake, higher flow heads, that should in theory more than make up for the fact that we're maybe not opening up the valves as high as we could. Yes, we've left some horsepower on the table, but we have picked up some durability, and I'm happy with that. So on to the duration. I said earlier, I wanted an intake and exhaust duration that were equally matched. It's harder to find than you would think, at least when I was looking for cams. I got pretty close with this cam, although not perfect. But there are some actual benefits to having a slightly longer exhaust duration than your intake. And I'm hoping that I can reap some of those benefits. For me, the possible benefit is what's called a scavenging effect, where when your exhaust valve opens, it can actually pull out the last bit of the exhaust and draw in some of the intake during that overlap that you see with a slightly longer exhaust. So even though there is a slightly shorter intake duration, the engine should still have no problem getting enough air to do what it's going to do. Some of the other advantages that you can get from a setup like that, particularly even longer exhaust versus intake, power adders. So if you're looking at nitrous or a turbo or a supercharger, your intake port doesn't have to be open as long because the air is going to be forced in anyway. And so we can go ahead and close that down sooner and allow the exhaust to be a little bit longer. So the duration on the exhaust allows us to get all that extra air out because there's really nothing forcing that air out in the same way that the air is being forced in during the intake stroke, with the exception of course, is the piston coming up. So I guess it is being forced, but you get the idea. People who run power adders find that they get better performance out of a cam that has a longer exhaust duration as compared to the intake duration, and in some cases pretty dramatically. So keep that in mind if you're going to be running a power adder, that you might want a cam that has a much longer exhaust duration than intake. But for me, for what I'm trying to do, naturally aspirated, we would like for those to be fairly closely matched as they are in this case. The last one is the lobe separation angle. This is actually a big one. So for me, I always thought that the choppy idle in the lobe came from the higher lift, but in fact it comes from your lobe separation angle. That's just something that I misunderstood all these years. Lobe separation angle, the wider that angle is, the less overlap you tend to have between your intake and exhaust, the smoother your idle tends to be, and the more drivable your car is, because you do tend to build better manifold vacuum pressure, which operates your brake booster, in my case my cruise control. There may be other things on your car that operate through those vacuum lines. And at high RPMs, it doesn't matter. It overcomes it. But at idle, or in a red light to red light situation, if you do a really narrow lobe separation angle, you're going to find yourself getting a bit of a leg workout from just operating your brakes. With a wide lobe separation angle, everything should work pretty much as designed. So I did go with the lobe separation angle that was just outside of what we see in typical factory specifications at 112 degrees. This is going to give me, plenty of low-end torque, but it's also going to allow me to make some up high. The factory engine in my car, the absolute red line, was around 5,000 RPMs. I do expect to go just a little beyond that, so I would like to have a lobe separation angle that would allow me to make power a little further on down the road. I'm not sure if it will. We're going to find out. But at the end of the day, this cam that I've chosen is a fairly mild cam. It's going to give me a lot of power for a 383 stroker. It's going to give me a lot of power in a car that, from the factory had 215 horsepower. I don't know what I'm actually going to make with this engine. I'm crossing my fingers and hoping I'm going to get somewhere close to 400. I don't know if that'll happen or not. I don't know about torque. The car from the factory made just over 300 foot-pounds of torque. I'm hoping for close to 500. Am I going to get there? I really don't know. We can always hope. Again, crossing those fingers. Ultimately, I wanted to build a car that was going to drive very much like a factory-built car, sound very much like a factory-built car, but have way more power than this car ever had from the factory. And I'm pretty confident that the setup that I have designed so far is going to give me exactly that. So that pretty well wraps up the discussion of the cam that I've chosen, why I chose it. And maybe if you're doing some cam shopping, hopefully you learned a little something. I know I certainly did. There's some other videos coming, including a video that I'm going to do on the heads and why, if I had it all to go over, I would definitely not buy those heads again. There's a little bit of a... We'll get into that when that video comes. But I got other things that are coming as well, so I don't know. I'm not ready to promise you that video is going to be next. What I will say is if you are enjoying this series, I'm going to ask that you go ahead and give me a thumbs up, a subscribe, a like, a comment in the comment section, something to get me noticed by the almighty algorithm. I am trying to grow the channel, and so far the channel has grown very well, and I want to thank you to everybody who supported me so far. So, until next time, this is Jason, and this has been Saving Sally.